Welcome to the First Time Facilitator podcast. Whether you're a first-time facilitator or a seasoned pro, listen in for tips and tricks to make a bigger impact at the next workshop you deliver. And now, your host. Her self-isolation days are like any other. She's up for a run and a dog walk, Leanne Hughes.
Hello and welcome to the show. I'm your host, Leanne Hughes, and I'm here to help you create unpredictable workshop experiences that predictably work. Thanks so much for tuning in to another episode. Last week on the show, I had Jan Keck on, and Jan was sharing the one Zoom cheat sheet to rule them all. What do I mean by that? Well, tune in and find a link to his Zoom sheet. If you have to onboard anyone into Zoom, if you want to get more comfortable using Zoom, it's the perfect tool. And best of all, it's free. So that's in last week's show. This week, it's time for an interview. We've had a few sort of solo mini-sodes. Now it's time to have a great conversation, and you're in for a treat today with today's guest. What we talk about are some really exciting things, and how, well, I guess the number one thing I learned from her is how powerful facilitation is as an everyday skill. Now, in this podcast, we really focus on workshops and meetings and events and anytime we have to run something in public. But how often will we sneakily use our superpower of facilitation to move things along, whether it's holiday planning or family conflict? It's a really handy skill to have. Today's guest has an awesome job as well, so we'll talk about her career pivots, but I might introduce her. Her name is Maria McDonald, and she's a learning and development consultant dedicated to helping leaders, businesses, and entrepreneurs intentionally shape effective, impactful, and empowered company cultures. Through customized consulting practices, Maria's innovative and energizing techniques support you in achieving your business goals while proactively developing your people. She also works full-time as the Learning and Development Manager for Geocaching, Geocaching. If you don't know what geocaching is, I get Marie to explain it, but it blew my mind when I was living in Western Australia and I had a colleague and he's like, I'm going geocaching on the weekend. I was like, what are you talking about? It is the coolest thing. So not only will you get exposed to some of the facilitation techniques and Maria's development and her growth in this field, but you'll also find out and may even develop a new hobby as a result of this conversation. We also dip into a chat around what adding value can look like when you're a facilitator helping teams out. A lot of the time we're working on what people call soft skills, but how does it demonstrate business value? How do you connect those dots? She shares how she used her superpower of facilitation to build her career within an organization. So if you're working internally and you want to get a start, this is the ultimate episode for you. It's extremely inspiring the way that Maria leveled up her career in the same organization. I won't give away any more details. I'll let Maria share her story. Of course, if you'd like to continue the conversation when the show is over, join our community of over 1,300 facilitators in the Facebook group called The Flip Chart. You can find that in the show notes for this one, as well as Maria's contact details. She wants to hear from you. Make sure you reach out to her. Let her know what one thing that resonated for you. The show notes are over at firsttimefacilitator.com/episode 164. If you'd like to support the show and my coffee addiction / the time of day where I generate my best ideas, head on over to buymeacoffee.com/Leanne Hughes. All right, that's it for me. Let's hear from Maria. Now onto the show. I am just over the moon excited to welcome onto the First Time Facilitator podcast, Maria McDonald. Maria, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Leanne. I'm really excited to be here and really excited to geek out about facilitation.
Amazing. Yeah, that's why we're here. That's why listeners are tuning in as well. We all like geeking out on this topic. And the reason I did invite you back, well, not for others, but I had a chat to Maria a couple of weeks ago and it was only a 20-minute conversation and I felt so enthusiastic and energetic afterwards. I learned a lot and I just wanted to share that and share her with the facilitation community. So Maria, for those of you that, I guess, listeners that don't know who you are, can you share a bit about your story, what pivots led you down to what you do now?
Yeah, so my name is Maria. I am very fortunate to work at a company called Geocaching HQ. We run the global scavenger hunt game called Geocaching, which is a really fun outdoor adventure game. I got to geocaching and got to facilitation in a very roundabout way. I actually started as a social worker. So I got my master's degree in social work. I worked with the child welfare system, which I don't know exactly how that translates to different cultures, but I worked with kids in the foster care system in the United States, which is a big problem here in the US. So I did that job for about 4 to 5 years. That was my first experience running groups. I was actually working with youth who were in drug and alcohol treatment. So that was the first time I was put in front of a group with this very serious subject with teenagers who were just off the wall. And they were like, here, facilitate these conversations around why kids shouldn't be drinking or doing drugs. That was it. That was my training for facilitation.
That was the training, that request, okay.
I was like, oh, no problem. What could possibly go wrong? A lot could go wrong. So it was very much an off the deep end approach to leading groups. I loved the kids though. Through my first introductions to facilitation there, I got a chance to see how when people could connect over shared experiences, real transformation could take place. And that's even without having any skills around facilitation. Luckily, I could at least get that happening with these youth. And I was able to see some really positive things come out of those relationships and the way they were able to connect with each other. So that was my first experience doing any sort of formal facilitation. And then fast forward a few years, I was totally burnt out with social work. It is such a hard job, just so much gratitude for everyone around the world who does that sort of work. It's so important and undervalued and underpaid and undersupported, all of those things. So I hit my limit, couldn't do any more. And luckily, my roommate at the time knew the hiring manager for an office management position at Geocaching. And I was so tired of social work that I was like, you know what, office management, that sounds easy. It sounds fun. The company sounded fun. The game sounded interesting. It sounded like it was in line with my values. So I was like, I'll just take a break from social work for a while and go try out this fun job at a tech company. Fast forward 8 years, I haven't left the company. I can't really picture going back to social work. So through that experience at Geocaching, I've moved from office manager to what I'm doing now, which is managing the learning and development department. And that all started because of facilitation, which I just think is such an interesting way that has developed over the past few years.
I just love your story. And for anyone that hasn't heard of geocaching, I kind of refer it, it's like the Harry Potter analogy where there's muggles, where people like have no idea that there's these like tokens and trinkets around the world. So we'll pop a link to the website, and it's such a cool activity, particularly if you're working with teams and it's like, the whole adventure element, being outdoors, treasure hunting. I mean, what's not to love about, about that role? And I love that you had this like mini break and thought I'll just try it. And it's been 8 years. I'm really curious to dig deep into that transition for you, because you came in as an office manager. 8 years later, you're now the L&D person. Like, tell me, how did facilitation really shape that career journey? And because a lot of people listening to the show, they don't see themselves as facilitator first. They might be a manager or an engineer, but they're using these skills. So how did you sort of adapt and realize, wow, this is what I really want to do?
Yeah, that's awesome. When I was doing the social work and I was leading those groups, I didn't even know it was called facilitation, right? Like, I didn't even know it was a specialized skill set. It was just like, basically work with these teenagers, don't let them get into fights, like if they learn anything, great. So I didn't even know at the time that that's what facilitation was. Fast forward to geocaching. What actually kicked the whole thing off was I took the 7 Habits of Highly Effective training, originally the book written by Dr. Stephen Covey. Now a 3-day design is shared by the Franklin Covey Foundation, and different people can facilitate that content in their office. Geocaching headquarters has been using that content for about 9 or 10 years now. So everyone in our entire company goes through that 3-day training. And we really believe that it helps us live into our values of being an effective organization. So it's got a lot of support. People are really behind the programming. So I took that training in my first 6 months and loved it. I was bought in. I drank the Kool-Aid. I was just like, yes, this is changing my life. I could see it helping me professionally. I could see it helping me through some really complicated personal stuff at the time too. So I just really immediately latched onto that skill set as something that was adding value to my life. And I got so into it that at some point, one of these fortuitous moments that can happen, I think, when you're starting to, move onto your path and there's some alignment. I was getting so into the 7 habits, I decided that I wanted to facilitate it. And I didn't even really know what that meant at the time. I just knew I wanted to spend more time with it. I was so passionate about it. I wanted to share it with others. So At the time, I was the office manager, so having nothing to do with facilitation, nothing to do with anything learning and development. I just knew I loved his content and I wanted to spread it around to my colleagues. It just so happens that I put together this proposal, which at the time I thought was very fancy and very professional about how I wanted to facilitate this. And I put it on the desk of the CEO. The same day, the CFO put a note on the CEO's desk saying, we're paying this consultant way too much money to come in and do the 7 habits. We need to find a better way to teach this. So
on the same day.
Same day. Yeah. So
amazing.
So the CEO was like, well, great. We're not paying the consultant anymore. We'll just train our office manager to do it. So that was the first official exposure I had to facilitation as a body of work and as a skill set. Was I went through Franklin Covey's training on how to facilitate the 7 habits. And then from there, I just fell in love with facilitation as a skill set, as a mindset, as a way to connect with people, a way to lead groups. It just really took off from there.
I love your story for so many reasons. I guess the first one is what you did was not brazen, but it's confident work to actually put something together like that and to put it onto the CEO's desk. That requires a lot of, I guess, motivation, self-worth, but also passion of this is what I really want to do. And I think that is just extremely admirable for anyone that's listening that works internally and feels a little bit stuck and wants an opportunity. I think my story was you kind of wait for it, but you can't do that. You've actually got to make the opportunity happen.
Yeah, I agree. And the company that I work for is, 80-ish people, and we're fairly agile. So there is some room to move around. And did it make sense for the office manager based on role to be facilitating the 7 habits? No, not necessarily, but it made sense in that I was internal in the company. Right before that, we were paying someone who didn't know our values, didn't know our people or our dynamics. So that was an easy thing to demonstrate value, that like, hey, I'm here, I'm not going anywhere. I can make this more of our culture if someone internal is doing this work. And I knew that I loved the company and I loved the people. I love our mission and I wanted to stay there. And if I was stocking soda cans and cleaning the kitchen, I would hit a wall and not be engaged by that. So I knew I needed something juicier to dig into. And the 7 habits definitely fit that bill. And then the facilitation just took on a life of its own.
Oh my gosh, just amazing. But it also sort of draws back to what you were doing with the social work as well. And it's like Stephen Jobs says, you can reconnect the dots looking backwards, but it's really hard to do that going forwards. But everything that you've sort of done has positioned yourself to do this. I'm another fan of the 7 habits. That was the first professional development book I read when I was a teenager.
Oh, cool.
And it was the first workshop that I ran at high school. I was like a senior leader, they call them prefects here, but we had like a camp. We had to go away and we had to each facilitate a workshop, and I just took something out of the 7 habits. So
cool. That's so cool.
It's so powerful. I really wanted to dig into your concept that you spoke about as facilitation being a skill set and being a mindset. Now, often in this podcast, we talk about facilitation in the context of running a workshop or running a meeting. And what I'm curious about is how you use it as a mindset. So how you actually use it as an everyday skill. Share some more on what that would look like for you.
Yeah, that's great. What a good question. As an everyday skill, to set it up, I would say I'm doing some mentoring at work now for other people who want to learn about facilitation. And one thing I said the other day is that I don't know if this is true for all crafts or all professional skills that you learn, but I think the act of learning how to be a good facilitator makes you a better person. And I don't really know how else to say that without it sounding maybe kind of narcissistic or something, but
you're in the right place to say that.
Yeah, I really do think if you're working on those skills of making sure every voice is heard in a space, yes, do that in a workshop and that's a good skill set. Use that as a mindset when you're even sitting around the table, at lunch with your colleagues, or you're at a family dinner, or you're meeting people for the first time, and you're using that idea of has everyone got a chance to talk? And you're just kind of purposely making sure everyone has a voice and everyone's contributing, everyone feels comfortable and welcome and included. You're adding a service to the world, right? Into your community by being the type of person that surfaces that equality, I think, and really helps everyone have a chance to be seen and heard. I think that's such a value that we add as facilitators. Again, not just in a workshop, but how can you learn that in a workshop and then not just do it in your life, or at least be thinking about it outside of a workshop. So that's one example that really comes to mind that I think just helps make facilitators better people.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, we should make this like the Better Person podcast, really. Yeah. I completely agree with you. And that's what it's great. It's such a cool skill because you can just practice it anytime there's like a few people around. Yep. As I said, at lunch or at a coffee or just having a conversation with 3 or more people or whatever the number is, you can absolutely use it. I think, and when I you mentioned something about being like inclusive and hearing all voices. I remember doing the Clifton Strengths Assessment. I was actually quite surprised. I had includer at number 6, and that is, then I wasn't surprised because I remember like when I go to parties, I always try to talk to the person that is like doesn't have anyone else to talk to. I'll make that effort to do that. So as you said, I think it does make you a better person. And I love that you've drawn it to that level and really, because I think I spoke to Phil Brown in a previous episode. We were talking about the word facilitator and how it's such an insider language thing. Yep. And, you and I get it, and all the listeners tuning into this podcast get it because they found the Facilitator podcast, but it's actually much broader than that.
Absolutely. If you think of that, you think of the root of the word, right? To make easy. So yes, in a workshop, maybe what you're making easy is reaching a goal, but at lunch with colleagues, what are you making easy? Connection, or space for people to share their values, or you're making it easier for people to listen to each other. You're making it easier for people to express things by asking better questions. You're just like making, I had it explained once as facilitators are social artists. And I loved that. I think that's so brilliant. So yeah, what is your vision of what social gatherings and what communities can look like? And then can you use your facilitation skills in service of like that artistry? I just think that's so cool.
Oh, I love that. Because the other thing, you could take it really extreme and go social manipulator. But I like to say orchestrate. You're a conductor, perhaps. Manipulation. It depends on who the skill sits with, right? The intention behind it, as you said. So in service, I think then you're orchestrating and it's artistry. But yeah, it's an absolute weapon. So talk to me. Then you got into this learning and development role. You've gone from office manager to L&D. Did you have to do a bit of, I'm curious about your internal brand then. Did you have to like build that up, and like how did you then say to people, I'm the L&D person now, this is what I do? Like what were you feeling in terms of your confidence in that role?
Oh my goodness. Yeah. The confidence was big. And I will say another thing to add on to that, I would say the biggest thing that was helpful was pacing. It was a very slow pace, right? So I've been with the company 8 years. The first couple of years, office manager. Then I started just facilitating the 7 habits. And then people were like, oh, Maria's kind of helpful in this facilitation role. Maybe we should invite her to facilitate retrospectives. Maybe she'd be helpful for mission statements and, building working agreements. So I just slowly started doing the facilitation thing in other places where it was helpful. And I think the real magic sauce, not to quote our buddy, but I think the real magic sauce is when your passions match the need of the business or the community, whichever way you're looking at it. So in this instance, my passion was I wanted to get better at facilitating because I loved it. I thought it was interesting. And the teams that I work for started to see that facilitation was adding value, making things easier for them, right? So I was getting invited into different things. And then at the time, I was working very closely with my boss and with the CEO, who are both just incredible, supportive, just, have really given me a really big runway to practice and play. And we are an adaptable, agile company, so we're good at trying things and failing. So I got to I failed a lot. There's a lot of failure. And with facilitation, you can only fail in public, unfortunately. So there's a lot of failing in public. But eventually it got to where the facilitation was adding so much value. We needed a way to put it in my job description, right? So then I was the office manager, I was the facilities manager. And then what we came up with was learning and development coordinator. So that's where it started. And that role hadn't existed at the company before. We're only 80 people, so it's a pretty small company to have that role. But the work I was doing was helping, and it was keeping me inspired and keeping me motivated. It was a good retention strategy for me, right, to stay longer and keep growing. So L&D coordinator got added, and then pretty soon we hired an office manager. So now I was just facilities and L&D coordinator, and then eventually L&D manager. And then there was a magical moment where the order on the job description switched from facilities being my primary duty with L&D second to now L&D was first and facilities manager was second. And then a year and a half later, now facilities and office management and everything else is gone, and I'm just the L&D manager. So slow, steady improvements over time. My skill sets grew slowly. The company invested in me. They let me go to facilitation trainings. They encouraged it. They let me try and fail. Teams trusted me to try and fail, which helped me grow. So it was just a slow process over time of honing my skills and always trying to add more value. That's what I kept thinking about. Like, where else can I use this skill set to add value in the company? And it just really took on its own life from there.
It's like we all need a geocaching company to work for, to build out. Like, that's like the perfect scenario.
It really is
perfect. Like having the comfort to fail and not being sort of judged or anything happening. It's like that kind of environment, and that's the environment we definitely want to create with every sort of team and company we work with. I'm curious, adding value as a facilitator. Like we want to add value, but what does that actually look for teams? Like, what does that mean? Does it mean more connectedness, great conversations? Does that lead then to profits? Like, how far do you map the adding value piece to? Yeah.
I mean, we're still working on it, to be honest, at the company too, right? Because some things are easy. Some things are like fuzzy, but they're adding value. Like, well, people are just getting along better. How do you measure that? I don't know, but you feel it, you feel it when people aren't getting along, certainly. And when people start to get along better, or communication improves, or there's suddenly less interpersonal conflict because you did a communications training and now there's less interpersonal conflict. It's hard to measure that, but you know it when you feel it, and managers feel it when their people are getting along better. So there's those sort of fuzzier metrics, I would say, that are hard to measure. And I think that learning and development is a hard field to put metrics around. And I do feel grateful to work at a company that we do have a set of metrics. I work with HR to look at retention and engagement and turnover, things like that. Yeah. But even those are like loosely connected. You're kind of stretching to see where they fit in there. So that's tricky. I will say another way of adding value that has been very directly helpful is taking pressure off managers. Let's say a manager or a team lead knows they need to facilitate something or they need to lead this meeting, when they can work with me and say, hey, Maria, here's what we're trying to do. Here's the goal. Can you just make that happen? And I'm like, sure, absolutely. Now they don't have to worry about stepping into a skill set that they might not have or might not want or be comfortable with. And I can just come in and help make that process happen. And then they also get to contribute equally, right? So now we've also helped shift the hierarchy, which I think is another key thing about facilitation, that you can learn that skill set in groups while you're facilitating. How do you balance out power dynamics? That's another skill or a mindset you can take into social interactions too, right? Like, what power dynamics are at play here, and how can I kind of equalize the dynamic?
Oh, massively. And I've certainly been in meetings where I've been the host, but I've also wanted to contribute. And it's just so hard. It's like you're the player coach of a team. Like I actually was a player coach of a netball team back when I lived in Western Australia. And it was tough because you put yourself on the field and you think, other people are on the bench and it's like, this doesn't feel right. Like, should I just bench myself even though I don't think that's a good idea? Like, it's
right.
Well, it's internal conflict. Let's dive into power dynamics. Like, what are some ways, or what have you seen work in terms of balancing and making it more equal, hearing all the voices?
I mean, the biggest one to me that I depend on is making sure whatever you call it up front, whether you call it ground rules, we often call them community agreements, team agreements, whatever gets set up very in the beginning, like in your strong opening. Here's what we're here to do. Here's how we're going to do it. Whatever you call that, to me, we call it community agreements at work. And I always speak to something about sharing space equally. I also try to anticipate who I know is in that group, because I've been with the same people for a long time. So I do know who talks easily, who doesn't talk as much, who, has a tendency to talk over people just from sheer excitement versus who will wait and say something after the meeting. I kind of know my people. And so I can think about who's in that group, what I have seen that dynamic be in the past, and how can I use those community agreements from the start to kind of help balance out that dynamic. So that's one that I rely on very heavily. Contrast, of course, which I learned from you. Just how many different things can we build into the design so that people who aren't comfortable talking could at least type it or write it or do some other way of contributing. I think that's a big way to contribute to, or a big way to contribute to that equalization of power. Also, what I'm really working on is letting people know prompts and information in advance. So our more analytical people, the people who want, a couple days to think through things before they're just put on the spot. So they have that information up front. And then when it comes time to ask for their voice into the space, they just feel more confident and more collected in what they're about to share.
Oh, I love that. Yeah.
So that's a big one.
Yeah, so many great ideas, and a lot of stacked around that sort of preparation, expectation setting piece beforehand. As a first-time facilitator, because I'm an extrovert, I don't mind thinking out loud. So I would just like throw people on the spot and be like, "Tell me this," and it's like, "Oh gosh," certainly learned from that. People need time, and it's nice to have
I do the same thing. And even like the creative process for me of designing, sometimes I won't know exactly what my prompts are going to be till the morning of. Like I'll have been thinking about it for a couple weeks, and it's not like I'm procrastinating on the whole thing, but it is a mixture of art and science, right? And so the science is like my template is there, and then the art is I wake up in the middle of the night before, and I'm like, gotta change everything, like move stuff around. And then my more analytical thinking friends are like way behind me. And so, trying to balance out that space to still be creative and let things be in the flow, which is such a big part of facilitation. There's another transferable life skill, right? Have a plan and then be totally prepared to go off plan.
Life skill. Yeah. Number one, especially for like the year we've had.
For sure. For sure.
Yeah, everyone's talking about agility, but it's like you can literally interchange that word facilitation, like in there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I love that you brought up the point around the art and science around it, because I actually posted something on Instagram stories yesterday. I was running a workship yesterday and I had my template prepared, but then like maybe an hour or two beforehand, I just thought of something else. I thought, how do I weave this in? Mm-hmm. And it's something that I love and hate about my style is that I will sort of like procrastinate, just like and I put in my 12 rules for facilitation, like give yourself a fake deadline, and I sort of do that, but then I'm still iterating up to the moment of delivery, and in the moment of delivery I'll just skip some things so it's great that you brought that up as a point. Now, Maria, you've got I think you're a yoga teacher. You've got a very nice energy, calming energy around you. Can you share with our listeners like what energy means to you in context of a workshop, and the importance of remaining? I can imagine you're remaining pretty calm and level-headed. That's my perception of you. How have you created that for yourself?
That's a big one. I got very lucky in that as I was learning how to be a facilitator, I was also learning how to be a yoga teacher. And it was the two things I was really into for the last 7 years now. I've just been obsessed with both of these things. And the overlap has been beautiful. Like the skills are so transferable. It's amazing. So I was practicing more corporate facilitation at work and then more yoga facilitation, on evenings and weekends. And I was learning in both places, and I was able to really enhance my skill set very quickly because I was doing it so much in such a variety of communities and platforms and spaces. So the meditation and the yoga really teaches you how to be in flow, right? Like a big philosophy of yoga is to not cling to things too tightly, not to like hold on and grasp at things, but to just like let open palms, like let things come in, let things come out. So that was hugely helpful for facilitation, where like that had been my plan. That clearly isn't going to work. Instead of forcing it, I'm going to just let that go and, be with the group and help move and flow with the group, still in service of, helping them get somewhere. So that was a really good one. And also just your ability to, I think the biggest one probably, especially for facilitators who get nervous and who get all of the anxious energy before you facilitate, the ability to say, oh, my heart's racing. Oh, I'm hot. Oh, I can feel, it's just like naming it for yourself instead of just letting it build to where it's spilling out of you and you can't keep yourself calm. Just starting to be able to name what's happening in your physical body, that connection to your physical body. I'm starting to feel hot. I'm starting to feel hungry. Do I have to pee? Nope, I already did that, right? Just like being able to like talk through how nerves show up in your body and being able to manage them that way. Knowing when you just need to take a few breaths and like calm down. That I think is so important. And the biggest one, this is my favorite thing to talk about, is how our nervous systems respond in groups, and how your role as a facilitator, first and foremost, is to help calm people's nervous systems down. And we have a whole lot of tools as to how we're doing that, right? Like even smiling at someone they walk in the door, the music you pick, how, intense is the lighting? Is there windows? Is there space? Do people have to have their backs to the door? All of these things either create an environment where people's nervous systems kind of go, oh, okay, I'm safe here. I can be calm. I can engage in learning, versus having their nervous system in more of the fight or flight, where nobody's learning in fight or flight, right? They're not paying attention at all to what you're trying to convey in that workshop. So being able to just be aware of how the human nervous system works, how the nervous system works in groups, and being able to keep your own nervous system very calm, because ultimately their nervous system is attuning to you, right? To your nervous system. And so I think the same way with energy, right? If you want high energy, you don't hope that they come with you. You pick the energy you want and you stay there even when it feels kind of awkward to you, right? Like you just ride that out and you like get them with you. So you set the energy and you set the nervous system for the whole group. So you have to be calm in your nervous system, because I think it's kind of unconscious, but they will pick up your nervousness. They will pick up your fight or flight. So you have to be able to ground and breathe and stay steady and model that as well. Even without saying a word, you have to be able to be doing all of that.
Thank you. That's brilliant, Maria. And it reminds me of sort of two analogies I've popped out of that. So one is dog training, but a dog can sense nervousness, right? So you actually really got to be very calm around the dog. Otherwise they can sense your fear and they might go on attack. So that's one. But also the one I talked about previously on the podcast, like the group fitness instructor. I go to a fitness class. It's at 5:30 in the morning. We're all dragging our feet in. No one wants to be there. They come in, they're like, hey, everyone, good morning. And then like within a minute, we're meeting their energy, but they brought it. Like if they were relying on us, it'll be the worst session. So I love that. Another thing that you mentioned, that it reminded me of a quote I saw Simon Sinek post on LinkedIn yesterday, and I hope I'm not paraphrasing this too incorrectly, but he said what confidence is, and you talk about control and gripping and then also being flexible. He said confidence isn't knowing everything. Confidence is the ability to know that when things change, that you're all over it. That's the paraphrase.
Cool.
Yeah, and I thought that's perfect for us as facilitators, is that we have the confidence that we know that whatever is thrown our way, we'll be able to navigate it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that. That's so brilliant.
I definitely paraphrased it because he didn't say you're all over it, but I'll have to find the quote and throw it in the show notes. It was something much more concise.
That makes sense, right? Because you can't be prepared for everything. And I think when you are first new at facilitating, that's what you're grasping for, is like, if I can be prepared for every scenario, I will have a response. And then eventually you move into, there's no way to know. This is a group of human beings. There could not be a more random, unpredictable thing that could happen, than a group of humans. So you've got this group of humans, and no matter how prepared you are, there's just no way you are going to know what's going to happen. So then your confidence comes from, no matter what happens, I trust that I will have a good enough response in that moment, and then that I'll learn from it and grow and do something different next time. And you just have to be able to settle into that, even though it's uncertain.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. It's unpredictable. Limitless. Yeah. And it's not even the people. It could be like the technology, or like something happens to the building. Like we've heard all the stories on this show. So in terms of the way you open up your workshops, do you have a reliable or something, like an activity that you love to run that you'd love to share with listeners?
I had 3 that I loved in real life, and I will be honest that I am still struggling to adapt to the virtual world in terms of icebreakers. I'm trying new things all the time. Some work, some don't. I really depend on this podcast. I depend on Yori on the magic sauce. I depend on a lot of facilitators just for constant ideas, and then I try them. Some work, some don't, so that's what I've been doing. But one of my favorites in person, it works great. You've got even amounts of people, so 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, maybe up to 14 people. And they do, I'm assuming rock, paper, scissors has a universal appeal. Yeah. So we call it rock, paper, scissors, lightning. So everybody pairs off You give the instructions because some people play it differently. So you set the groundwork for what we're going to play it, how we're going to play it right here. And you have people pair off and compete with each other. The winner of the pair is now goes the number one cheerleader for the person who won, and they follow them through all the rest of the rounds, cheering them on. So eventually you get to one-on-one people, like the 2 people left standing, and each one of them has this giant group of cheerleaders who are like encouraged to be like, yeah, go kick their ass, like yelling, and it just erupts into noise and energy, and it's ridiculous. And that one has always worked really well. I love that opening.
I love that. I've seen it. I've actually seen it with a group of, I think it was like 50 graduates, or no, it would have been like 100 graduates at this dinner. And it was, Maria, it was like the roof is coming off. It was so loud and boisterous, and it got really competitive. Like really, people like, oh no, I lost. And
because it's so simple, and everybody has a role, right? You're either playing or you're cheering, and I think that gives it so that makes everybody included the whole time, which is nice.
Yes, rather than like eliminating someone and everyone's like an observer.
Right,
you don't want, you want people involved.
Another one that I love is the secret handshake. Have you heard of this one?
Tell me.
So I have people break up into pairs again, and they make up a secret handshake. And the first time everybody just does it, basic, or they come up with something. And then they show it to the whole group, and the rest of the group claps for them when they're done with their secret handshake. Round 2, they find a new partner. So we're changing it up so people are working with different people. And this time they have to use new body parts that neither of them have used in the last round. So almost always people go with hands at first. So then you add new body parts, and now they're using elbows, knees, hips, shoulders, like they're getting all sorts of weird body parts in. And then again, each pair shows the whole group and everybody claps. They switch one last time to a third person, and this time they have to add sound effects. So now they're using hip swoop, woo, like adding in all sorts of sounds, and it's chaos and fun and silly. And again, everyone's participating. Even the more introverted people, I think, because it's in groups of 2, feel confident doing that. So that one always works really well in real life.
I love that one. Bring me back to a face-to-face workshop. I would love, I mean, hopefully soon this vaccine, we can all be back and doing it. Amazing. Thank you for sharing those. Maria, is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners, advice for first-time facilitators that are tuning in?
Oh, don't give up, even if your first few experiences feel hard or discouraging or nerve-wracking. That's just part of the game. Like, learn to embrace all of that and let it be part of what fuels your enthusiasm and excitement to learn more. Definitely don't do it alone. There are so many incredible communities of facilitators out there. And so I think it's important to find a few who match your style or who match your, how you're facilitating, and really learn from other people, because there is just a wealth of knowledge in this career and in this skill set. And people are so passionate about it. They're happy to share. They want you to succeed. They want to give you feedback. I just think there's so much support. So we don't have to do it by ourselves. And facilitation is a service, I think, to the world, to your team, to your group, to your community. And so because you're doing that service of giving to other people, let yourself also be supported in that, and like take advice and support from other people along your way.
Oh, absolutely. And I agree. It's the most collaborative sort of career group that I've met, because that's the nature of what we do. It's like we like to co-create with groups. So then inherently we want to share our knowledge and want people to get ideas and then riff off them and create something new. And that's the beauty of it. And it just we just keep improving our craft as a result, all of us. Maria, absolutely. You're awesome. Where can people connect with you? I'd love to ask you more questions or find out more about what you do.
Yeah, I'm just now starting to get into LinkedIn and trying to use that platform, mostly because I really want to connect with other L&D professionals and other facilitators to talk about how we're facilitating and how L&D is going at work, especially virtually, especially right now. I think our company is doing really cool things, and I like to highlight that. And I really want to hear from other L&D and facilitation experts what they're doing at their organizations too. So I'd love to get on calls with people and hear about what they're doing, and just let's all help each other up level and do exciting, fun, cool things together right now.
Agree. Amazing. Yeah, there's a lot of great work being done out there. I would love to hear what you're doing with geocaching as well. Maria, again, I said it, you're awesome again, but you're so great, just awesome, really cool, level-headed, lots of amazing tips. And thanks for sharing your career story as well and talking about facilitation as just an everyday skill set that can make us better people. That's very powerful. Thank you so much for being on the show. It's been great having you here. We'll pop a link to your LinkedIn profile in the show notes. Thanks,
awesome. Thank you, Leanne.
Hey, thanks so much for sticking around. You've reached the end of another episode of the First Time Facilitator podcast. Connect with the show at firsttimefacilitator.com or follow me on Instagram at Leanne Hughes to find out what I'm up to during the week. If you enjoyed this episode, please feel free to share it with someone who will also appreciate the insight, and make it easier for yourself and subscribe to the show in your podcast player of choice. Thank you so much for listening, and chat to you next week.